Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We have a great guest for you today and a great topic that I know people are going to love here because it's Baltimore-based and it's about Justin Tucker. Joining me today is Aaron Schatz, and he is the editor-in-chief and founder of Football Outsiders. If for some reason you've been in a hole and you don't know who Aaron is, been on all sorts of things. We've seen him on NFL Network top 10 lists, opining on the history of football. Extremely knowledgeable resource that we're very lucky to have. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right. Always a pleasure. I can tell you that. Been hoping we could have you on for a long time, but we're going to talk a little bit about Justin Tucker today, but I thought we'd go through the model that Football Outsiders has for special teams, which has always been really interesting to me. And the Ravens currently number one special teams team in football still?
Yep.
All right. Well, let's look at how they got there, the various pieces. Take us through this, if you would. And for those listening on a podcast, we're looking at the Football Outsiders website. Highly recommended. $5 a month to join. Is there an annual?
Yeah, there's an annual option as well. And this is free. Special teams ratings are free, but to get the more advanced stuff, like the ability to filter by week, and our special Friday film study column that previews every game, and our fantasy projections, and our picks against the spread, that all requires a subscription.
Okay. But it's $5 one price for everything, or are there a couple different tiers?
Nope, one price for everything.
Okay, fantastic. So we have the special teams here, and we're looking across at the various columns. Can you kind of take us through the various pieces of this?
So the first couple columns are just the special teams rating, weighted rating, which is basically the same right now, but by the end of the year, weighted rating will not include September, right? It's sort of a rolling, like older games become less important rating. And then Dave, which is our rating that combines the rating from the season with our preseason projections, because we've discovered that, your prior knowledge from the preseason is actually valuable until 3 months into the season. So we still use our preseason projections for a couple of months. And then we break special teams into 5 main categories: field goals and extra points, kickoffs, kick returns, punts, and punt returns. Kickoffs and kick returns and punts and punt returns are based on sort of an expected points added model. Like, what was the expected points added value of this position on the field? What's the expected points added of the position on the field after the punt, and then what's the average number of expected points added that you get from a punt from the 22, let's say, and then how many expected points added was this punt from the 22, and then you subtract them. And so what you get is a estimated value of the field position above average. Field goals works a little differently, and that's what we're going to talk about here. Field goals are based on what is the NFL average from each point on the field in general over the last few years. And so if you hit a field goal, you get points above average. And if you miss, you lose. So for example, if the average number of points from the 50 is, 2.3, hitting the field goal gets you plus 0.7, and missing the field goal gets you minus 2.3. And that's how we do field goals and extra points.
Okay, so excellent thing. There's 2 things I want to ask you about with regard to that. One is it not quite a zero-sum game because the trailing nature of what you're comparing it to? So you're trailing, say, to a 3-year average, so you have a generally rising.
I try to adjust the baselines every year to get the average for the league as close to 0 for that year as possible.
Okay, but you don't adjust after the fact to make an adjustment for the fact that, hey, all kickers are kicking better, so we could maybe adjust this by.
No, we do. We adjust. I adjust a little bit each week to try to keep the league average around 0.
All right, fantastic. And then a zero-sum game, of course, for the entire league, then you're trying to make it, and that's what you just said, so I don't need to re-say that for you.
And the other thing I should point out is that our numbers are adjusted for weather and altitude. Now, I do not put in the specific weather of every game. So I should, say this is sort of a rough estimate weather and altitude adjustment. But basically, kicks have a different, for example, field goals are more likely to convert, especially from longer distances indoors. We know that. We know that they become harder to hit as the season goes on into December, and that change is stronger in cold weather cities than in warm weather cities. And we know that field goals are easier to hit, especially long field goals, in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
So Denver is special. Like Denver, it gets colder, and so it gets harder to hit field goals, but it starts much easier because it's Denver and there's altitude. So we adjust for those two things in our field goal numbers and in our kickoff and punt numbers as well.
Okay. So very cool. So you got a whole lot of adjustments here. There is nothing in the special teams unit for blocking field goals, right? There's nothing directly.
Yeah. So a blocked field goal counts as just a missed field goal. And then I don't give credit for the blocked field goal. And the reason why is what we call non-repeatable plays.
Mm-hmm.
It's not luck, right? Because there's obviously skill involved, and teams practice blocking field goals and they practice blocking punts, and those are very valuable plays, but they're not repeatable in that hitting, blocking a field goal is not really a good indicator of whether you're going to block more field goals later in the year.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't actually give value to the defense that blocks the field goal because it's not predictive.
So Ed Reed's 4 block punts, 3 return for touchdowns in his first 2 years. You guys would have missed it in this model, and that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, that we've, for the most part, it's not. Reed's a little bit of a special case when it comes to interception returns for touchdowns, honestly. But we don't incorporate blocked kicks, and we don't incorporate 2-point. We don't incorporate blocked kicks, 2-point conversions, and squib kicks, and onside kicks. Onside kicks are not included either because those are also not predictive.
Okay. All right. So outstanding stuff. And this gives you an idea of Football Outsiders. And so the Ravens, if you go across piece by piece, I can see that they're number 1 on the chart here. And I know some of the people listening on the podcast can't, but the major components of that are 2 things. It looks like it's the field goal and extra point number, and the kickoff return number is also quite good.
Right. Primarily because Duvernay, it's early in the season, so it's only a 6-game sample. And Duvernay had the touchdown return against Miami.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why Miami is last in special teams. Although if you take out that kick return, Baltimore would still be first and Miami would still be close to last.
Okay. All right. So outstanding. And then when I read the number at the end, which is the unadjusted VOA number.
That's without the weather and altitude adjustments.
Okay. So I don't want that one. I want I probably want the weighted DeVoa or the standard.
Yeah, you want the first one. That's the value for the entire season, is just where it says special teams DVOA.
Mm-hmm.
I call it DVOA. I spell out the letters rather than saying it in some kind of shorthand, but that is their rating for the season. The weighted rating, when we get into like December, then that will be like, December and November games will be full strength, and October games will be partial strength, and September games will not count. And so it's that sort of thing. But right now, there's very little difference between weighted and total because there's only been 6 weeks.
Right. Okay. So now when I would look at a number like 6.4, 6.5% DeVoa in that first column, can I translate that into anything else that would be more meaningful to me? Like
points if you like points is you add together the 5 columns. Unfortunately, it's sort of silly of me that I don't have a column that's just adds together those 5-point values. But basically, the way the special teams things works is that you get the points above average. So if you add together those 5 columns, you end up with something like 12.2. It's been worth, the special teams have been worth 12.2 points for Baltimore above expectations. And then the DVOA turns that into one of these efficiency percentages, specifically on a scale that allows me to add it to offense and defense.
Okay. That was the question.
So I can do the whole team, right? The DVOA exists so it can be added to offense and defense.
Okay, last question I had about this was Tucker has a points above expected for his field goals. And the question was, does it use the entire league's field goal percentage, or does it take out the Tucker kicks so that he's not competing against himself?
No, it uses the whole league. It would be too hard for me to have a different baseline for every player based on the average without that player. It's too complicated for me.
Okay. No problem here. So anyway, we're going to look into to Justin Tucker and some of the historical elements next, and got some great slides from Aaron in terms of what to do. And let me make sure I can bring these up here. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second, then we'll present again, and we'll bring up what we wanted to in terms of slides. Make sure I go to the right place here. Okay. All right. So tell us what you did in the material you sent me.
So Football Outsiders has broken down every play of every game going all the way back to 1981. We have 41 and a half years of data right now. And for every year, I've done these special teams ratings. Now, the baseline changes because as we go earlier in time, kicking was harder, and so the league average was worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so the league average changes. But we can do value over expectation going all the way back to 1981 for every kicker in the league. So what I did when you asked me was it was easier for me to do this by team rather than specifically by player. So there are some teams that mix together a couple of kickers.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did was I looked at every team's value in field goal value over expectation for a 10-year span. And then I took out all the repeats. So what you see is Justin Tucker with Baltimore over the last 10 years is number one. He's been worth 129 points over expectation by our metrics. Nick Lowry from the Kansas City Chiefs from 81 to 1990 is second, and he's actually pretty close at 115. And then there is a huge drop-off. And third is Morton Anderson with the Saints from 84 to 93 at 67. So if you really looked at the top 10-year spans, they would all be either Baltimore teams that were mostly Tucker or Kansas City teams that were mostly Lowry. So what I did was I put together a list that did not repeat itself. So these are 10 discrete spans of time over the last 41 years that are the best field goal kicking periods. And you can see if you are looking, and I'll tell you if you're listening on a podcast, Baltimore at 129 and Kansas City 81.90 at 115 are way ahead of everyone else. Like third is Morton Anderson at 67. Fourth is Mike Vanderjagt at 64. Fifth is Eddie Murray at 61. Then Gary Anderson, 59. Rob Baronis, 58. Sebastian Janikowski, 57. Matt Stover, 56. Another Ravens kicker. And Steve Gostkowski, 54. So the gap between Tucker and Lowry and everyone else is colossal. But it's kind of shocking if you adjust for era how close Nick Lowry is to Justin Tucker.
Totally shocking.
I mean, Tucker's still the greatest kicker of all time. But Lowry is much better than anybody remembers when you consider just how low league averages were in the early 80s.
Did you, I know before you didn't have this, but did you happen to add up all of Lowry's years, including his decline years, into one single number?
Yes. So Lowry's career total, here's the problem. Lowry was a rookie in 1978.
Oh, okay.
And we don't yet have 1978 through 1980. So I can tell you his career total from 1981 through 1996 is 132.
Okay.
And Justin Tucker's career total, including the first 6 weeks of this year, is 134.
All right.
So no kicker. I'm sure if we went before 1980, same thing. No kicker has ever had a career value as high as what Justin Tucker's career value is right now. Now, he's going to add to that with a few more years, and one or two of them are going to be decline years. Justin Tucker will have decline years, but he won't for a while. So he is going to put space between him and every other kicker who's ever played that's going to be large. Like if we elected players to the Hall of Fame based on how good they were compared to the average at their position, without considering the importance of the position, Justin Tucker would be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Do you think that'll be the way it ends up, by the way?
I think that Justin Tucker will be a later ballot Hall of Famer. I think what'll happen, first of all, this gets into the whole how the Football Hall of Fame works. And it's complicated by the fact that only 5 players can go in per year. And so players have to wait their turn. But there's no question that by the time he retires, Justin Tucker will be easily recognized as the greatest kicker in football history. And he will go into the Hall of Fame.
Now, you mentioned a couple of things that really interest me. The first was catching the decline value of a player's career. And we see that in baseball, of course, when the last few years of a player's career, they never hit for the same batting average, particularly a great player, as they did in their early years when they were racking up their great stats. And so there's some decline years you expect from that. And I would expect that Justin Tucker is going to get second chances, maybe with another organization somewhere else.
Yeah,
that will be at the end of his career.
2030. When he's kicking for London in 2030.
Yes, there you go.
But like, for example, Lowry was below zero only 1 year of his entire career. And it was his last year, 1996, when he was 40 years old. And Morton Anderson was terrible in his last 2 years. And Stephen Gostkowski was terrible in the 1 year he played for Tennessee. So not every kicker has this happen, but a lot of these guys do hit a point in their late 30s, early 40s where they have a terrible year or two.
And you would kind of expect that because there needs to be an impetus to get rid of that guy. And kickers have kicked into their late 40s before.
Yeah, but the human body gets weaker, man. That's not, and to be honest, I don't want to diss on kickers here, but if you think about the age curves of most NFL players, what happens is your body breaks down, but your intellect improves, right? And there's a point at which the balance between the two is at its highest, and that's your peak, which is usually around age 26 or 27. For quarterbacks, the intelligence is even more important. So their peak lasts longer because they're getting smarter and they're learning more about the game, even as their body is falling off. I don't think kicking requires quite as much intellect as quarterbacking. No, I mean, I know you have to figure out where the wind is headed, and there's ways that you need to set up depending on whether it's on the left hash mark or the right hash mark. But I don't think it's the most intellectually challenging position on the field if you compare it to quarterback or center.
Yeah. Fair enough. Now, one name I don't see on this list that always comes up in kicker discussions is Adam Vinatieri. Now, I know people think of Adam as a guy who is in the Hall of Fame based on or he's not in the Hall of Fame yet, right?
He will be. He will be in the Hall of Fame, yes.
For making some clutch Super Bowl kicks. Where would he have showed up on this list, or would it even be possible? Because he switched teams, and so there might not be a easy 10-year stretch.
So I would have to go and look at what were the best 10 years of his career. My guess is that he would be around 15th or something.
Okay.
Because he was good. And I say this as a Patriots fan, the idea that Adam Vinatieri was the greatest kicker of all time is ridiculous. Adam Vinatieri has the most clutch kicks of all time because Adam Vinatieri has the most clutch opportunities of all time. If you look at the number of opportunities that every kicker has had since 1981 in the last 2 minutes or overtime to tie or take a lead, Adam Vinatieri has something like 15 more opportunities than any other kicker in the last 42 years.
Wow.
So he doesn't even have a particularly high rate. Like his actual accuracy rate on these clutch field goals is very average. He's just had more opportunities, and a couple of them won Super Bowls. And I think that he's worth going into the Hall of Fame for that, because you put guys in the Hall of Fame in part because of the story you can tell about them. And the fact is, the man won 2 Super Bowls with his field goals, but he's nothing close to Justin Tucker as far as the actual best kicker of all time.
Am I correct that you're on committees that choose for the Hall of Fame or for the?
I am not on the Hall of Fame committee. God, I would love to be. That would be freaking awesome.
It would make sense.
I am on the AP panel. I am on the Associated Press panel of 50 media people. So I vote for MVP, Coach of the Year, Rookie of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, and I vote for the All-Pro team.
All right. Very, very cool. Let's look at the other slide here just for a second, because we've gone through some of this, but that's Tucker over on the left side at 129 points in his best 10-year span. If we looked at the last 10 years, Tucker would be at 129. Then there'd be a whole bunch of other teams that would be sloping down to the right, down to, you mentioned some very bad teams that would be negative a lot.
The worst team of the last 10 years, including, so I added up all of Tucker's career, including this year. Tampa Bay at minus 68, and the Los Angeles Chargers at minus 50.
Wow.
And obviously for those teams, you're talking lots of different kickers. That's, there was not one kicker going minus 68 for Tampa, because if you go minus 15, you get fired.
Yeah. There's some people at the bottom end of the field goal percentage list. Like one of them was the guy who kicked the longest field goal in NFL history at one time. Burt Retchachar was 56 yards. And his position on the list is entirely secure at exactly the spot he is from the bottom, because you can't have 50 kicks and make 15 of them in the NFL now.
It's field goals are a very different world. But even, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but going back and doing these years from the 80s, my God, the bad field goal percentage that teams accepted in 1983 compared to 83 was a particularly bad year. With a lot, 83 has the highest standard deviation of field goal value. Like there are a couple of really good years and a couple of really, really bad years. But like what teams were willing to accept from their field goal kickers compared to now is like crazy.
This
guys brings like 65%. It's bad.
Yeah, at one time, and this is during my early days of fan, but probably would have been right around 1980. Rolf Bernerschke was the highest field goal percentage in NFL history, and he was at 75. So it was at that point it was changing every couple of weeks.
Yeah, the two worst seasons we've ever measured are both 1983. Tampa Bay at minus 25 and New England at minus 24.
Wow. Okay, so that brings me to another question here, which is the NFL has regulated itself, combined scouting, instituted a salary cap, a whole bunch of things since 1980, which create a conform or perish nature to the way scouting, analysis of players, the talent pipeline works. It would have made sense to me if you'd have told me that the general trend was to lower variance in kick outcomes. But we were doing a little bit back and forth by email before, and you said, well, no, that really hadn't been the case, that the 1980s didn't have a general trend for that.
No, it's just 2 years that specifically stand out, 1983 and 1985. Other than those 2 years, the standard deviations in the 80s were pretty similar to now. I would love to go back and do the 70s and 60s, though. That's when you really had the gradual change between the front style kickers and the soccer style kickers. Oh man, what the standard deviation must be like in like 1975 and stuff. I'm sure it's huge, because you still have a little bit of that going on from like 81 to 85.
Right. That's the.
I don't remember when the last straight ahead kicker retired, but I think there were still guys kicking straight ahead in the early 80s.
Mark Mosley comes to mind. He won MVP award during the strike shortened year.
The worst MVP award ever given in any American professional sport.
And you were not voting at that time, but
I was not voting at that time, and I would like to apologize right now to Dan Fouts for the fact that I was not a voter at the time. Dan Fouts' award. That was.
I feel sure that Dan Fouts for Raiders would love to come on this show and accept the award, retrospectively.
He'd rather have a Super Bowl championship, honestly, but it's the Chargers. What do you want?
All right, fantastic stuff here. It's nice to see two Ravens decades on the list with Tucker and Stover both represented, and Baltimore fans, of course, love their Tucker. And I look for anybody who has an interesting model that they want to display. Great stuff, Aaron. Tell folks once again where they can find your work on Twitter and where they can find your work online.
So on Twitter, it's FO_A Schatz. My difficult to spell name is ASCHATZ. And then footballoutsiders.com. If you want to follow us on Twitter, it's at FB Outsiders. The site is footballoutsiders.com, and a lot of free content. But then with a subscription, you get special content. You get our stats on Monday instead of Tuesday if you're a subscription person. You get picks against the spread, including over-under picks. You get fantasy projections. You get special content. There's all kinds of stuff. And you get these numbers going back to 1981.
All right. Aaron, thanks for joining us. This is an absolutely cool topic, detailed in a way that I think is very understandable, and I really appreciate that. You're welcome anytime on the show. I hope we can have you back another time on another one of your models.
Yeah, next time we'll talk about how great Lamar Jackson is.
There we go. All right, folks. Other folks out there, if you want to get on a film study short, hit me up with a DM on Twitter. They're always open. Thanks to our sponsor, Liquid Death, the water that will murder your thirst. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.